Welcome to yet another instalment of In the Footsteps of Isabella Bird. Those of you who have been following me will know all this, so I'm sorry I have to repeat it now and again. And essentially this is in lieu of a documentary that I was supposed to be making, where it would have been all nice sound bites and it would have been great photography of the actual places that Isabella Bird travelled to in 1879, native states of Malay, as they used to call them. And we thought it would be interesting to retrace her steps and in situ tell you all about the characters that she met and give you an indication of really the colonial setup that happened at that time. And it was a very interesting period that she went there, because she met the first residents of what became the Federated States of Malaya. And they were of, let's just say, an interesting character. That's the nicest way of putting it. Some of them were outright rogues, and some of them were, well, prissy narcissists, and so on and so forth. The colonial enterprise here was somewhat different to the one that took place in Africa and took place in India and took place elsewhere. Every place had its own little characteristics, and here one of the main characteristics is how unpopular it was back in the UK. The government really did not want to have anything to do with these guys. In fact, Lord Aberdeen actually called them treacherous. But people on the spot felt something had to be done. And, well, I've been telling people why they thought that, and we'll go on to a bit more about that later on. But she's in Penang. She's arrived in Penang. Now, Penang is an interesting colony. It was at the end of the 18th century, a guy called Captain Light came and he created a British trading colony called Georgetown on the island of Penang. Now that he'd been around this region for a long time, he'd married locally. In fact, some people say that the woman he married was actually the daughter of the Sultan of Kedah. She was half French, half Malay, perhaps half Thai. We don't quite know what she was. She had a French background there, because they were all based in Phuket at that time, and there were a lot of French traders floating around this region, ready to pounce on what became French China. So the French were always seen as the rivals of the British, but this guy was an agent for the East India Company, but he did a lot of trade on his own, and in due process he'd helped the Sultan of Kedah against the Siamese, and he was also a bit of he'd been involved in defending Phuket against the Burmese at an earlier state. So he was a player in the region. He was known, and the Sultan of Kedah felt quite comfortable with him and offered him this trading zone in Penang in exchange for him persuading the East India Company to back the Sultan against the Siamese. Needless to say, the East India Company they weren't that keen on Penang. Penang, where the hell's that? What's the point? It doesn't control the straits. It doesn't. What is it all about? But Captain Light thought that it would be handy to have a nice place for the British ships to harbour, because essentially the Dutch were running the whole region, and they were stopping British trade taking place, and they were always very awkward characters to deal with, and so having a British base was seen as would make it just easier for British traders to work. So that's how it came about. Needless to say, the East India Company was quite happy to allow it to happen, but when it came to being called upon to actually help poor old Sultan of Kedah against a Siamese incursion, forget about it, they said. and the Sultan he wanted Penang back, and that caused a lot of friction between the Sultan and of course poor old Captain Light caught in the middle of all this. But in the end, what happened is that the Siamese came in, overran the place, and Captain Light gave the Sultan of Kedah and his family a place to stay in Georgetown, helping them with their security. And later on, of course, the Sultan managed to claw back Kedah after a number of military incidents, so to speak. None of these things were big battles as such. They were always rather guerrilla warfare type things going on. But in the end, he agreed to pay tribute to Siamese, and they let him back in. But it was I don't know, 20 years later or something like that. I can't remember the exact date right this moment, but it was a long time in exile. Captain Light in 1794, though, did what a lot of these guys do. They died. He died of malaria, and you can find his grave in where is it now? It's the Northam Road in Penang. Go to the old Protestant cemetery there, and you'll find Captain Light. And in fact, you'll find a whole bunch of others in this Whiteman's graveyard. Governors, and of course, poor old Mr. Superintendent Lloyd, who got hacked up by the Chinese gang. He's there, and there's a whole history to be learned just by going around and seeing who was killed there. And I do recommend you spray yourself with as much anti-mosquito spray-on material. I'm trying to think what the word is. It's anti-mosquito, anti. Is that what you call it? I don't know. You spray it on, you stick it on your face and all over. It's terrible stuff, but it barely works. Quite frankly, when I was in there, I could see myself actually just digging myself a grave and crawling into it because I was bitten to death. The place is full of mosquitoes. But that's beside the point. Captain Light's statue. I'm just telling you about Captain Light a little bit. Captain Light's statue that you will see in Fort Cornwallis there is actually modelled upon his son, because Captain Light was dead. His son was the guy that was the surveyor who laid out Adelaide. And we can trace that back to the son-in-law of the Governor Adelaide, who became the son-in-law of Bloomfield, Douglas, and up in something. There was this Australian connection going on all the time around this region. But to moving on, right from the Whiteman's graveyard, we're going to as Isabella goes to Penang, and she is bowled over by its cosmopolitan flavour. There's Arabs, there's Indians of various kinds, there's Chinese, of course, everywhere, and she did say rather pointedly that she didn't see any Malay women, and there was only a population of about 612 Europeans. You can well understand that this being the Whiteman's graveyard, it was not an attractive place for Europeans to go, but it was an attractive place for a lot of Chinese to go, and a lot of people there to make money. And she asked one of the boatmen in the harbour, said, "Why is this so popular with people?" Well, it's British administration. It's here. It's controversial position. Not exactly in a place that is overly enthusiastic about British administration, but so why does everybody want to go live there? And he said simply, Empress good, she let coolly earn money, keep it. And that was it. No tax. The British just opened it up as a free port, unlike the Dutch, and this was very attractive to people. And the Achinese, in many respects, they were both the rivals of Penang, but they formed a curious relationship, took up a sort of a friendly rivalry between the two. They had a lot of people from Aceh settled around Penang and set up businesses, and so they had a good relationship in that area, and so Penang became this cosmopolitan place where everybody was busy doing their own thing. And this is what she said And this is an interesting point to make. This is what she said. The Malay people live strange and uneventful lives. The men are not much inclined to much effort in fishing or hunting, and where they that's what I've written down here. Where they possess rice land. Can't read my own writing. In ploughing for rice. I'll read that again. The men are not much inclined to much effort in fishing or hunting, and where they possess rice land, in ploughing for rice. Ploughing for rice. She obviously it's a strange way of describing paddy fields. And how one cultivates them. Incidentally, cultivation of paddy fields was a woman's work, so she would not have seen any men doing that. In fact, often it was the women that owned that land. Hence the naming of some of these places after local widows. The Minangkabau in that region, of course, handed down land through the female side. So, there's a great deal of sort of missing the point in some respects here. Anyway, she goes on. They are not savages in the ordinary sense. They're savages in an extraordinary sense, no doubt, for they have a complete civilization of their own and their legal system derived from the Quran. Well, there you go. Words like savages come to mind all the time. There's a romance about the savage coming out of the jungle, and she's in the jungle and she finds, she's searching for savages, finds wild beasts, even when the wild beasts are hidden away and are not that wild, really. They're wild, but beasts. I know that monkeys can give you a nasty bite if you prod them with a stick enough, but quite frankly, you have to travel quite a bit to fall into the food chain, so to speak. True, there were tigers, and they were people were hitting upon their food, falling into their food chain, and the expansion of villages and cultivation and so on was actually getting the tigers to start moving into the cities. And Malacca had a problem with tigers picking off people on the outskirts of town and so on. So tigers were an issue, but quite frankly, savages and beasts. Well, I haven't lived in Malaya for 6 years. A sort of savage is not a word that, or wild is really not a word that comes to my mind. The jungles are wild in a certain fashion, but they're not wild as like a party. Anyway, so as I say, she's complaining about the Malay lack of enterprise, so to speak, and yet earlier on she meets up with Data Bandar, and she's complaining that he meets her whilst he's working in the orchard, and he's got a check shirt on, and in fact quite a number of sources talk about the locals and how the men worked in the orchards, and they cultivated gardens, and they built houses, and they were forever putting these things up and pulling them down because wooden places get full of insects and such. Well, they didn't actually pull them down; they let them fall down. They or burnt them down or something. They were always trying to fumigate them by setting fires underneath them, so which must have occasionally gone wrong. But there was things that they did that she just wasn't around to see them doing. Plus, there was this other thing about working for other people. And also, there was a slave culture there, and a lot of people were indentured to debt slaves of this local sultan over generations. And as anybody knows, slaves tend to work very inefficiently. They have no stake in the whole proceedings, and so they pretend, my spade's broken. Where can I get a spade? They feign ignorance and stupidity, and it's part of a cultural thing that you kind of feel perhaps lingers on and cultivates this the lazy Malay stereotype that's out there, and it still exists, but it is something to do with this sort of underlying relationship between the employer and employee, or the owner and the owned. It leads to a lot of misunderstandings. Let's put it that way. Anyway, of the Chinese, this is interesting as well. She says the Chinese are everywhere the same: keen, quick-witted for chances, markedly self-interested, purpose-like, thrifty, frugal, on the whole regarding honesty as the best policy, independent in manner as in character, and without a trace of Oriental servility. Now then, of course, this is interesting because on other occasions they're portrayed as opium-addled, brothel-fighting, argumentative gamblers, totally dissolute, untrustworthy, inscrutable. These are words even she's uses later on. And in fact, we will. A lot of the British at that time did think that Chinese were nothing but damn trouble. It's something that the sultans often agreed upon. But on the other hand, they brought them all in to labour. And of course, there were the other Chinese, the ones that had settled centuries ago, going right back to the beginning of the whole sultanate. Malacca was originally a tributary to the Chinese, and Chang He helped set up old Shah Iskandar's establishment there. And there were a lot of the Peranakians around on this east coast and on the west coast, quite frankly. They were there right from the beginning. And of course, a lot of Malays have Chinese ancestors. Once they've converted to Islam, they get an Islamic name and then Islamic culture, and they become a Malay very quickly. One generation, one marriage. That's it. That's all it takes. These things, she's missing a certain amount of nuance here, to say the least. And on top of that, there is this thing about Oriental servility. The surprise is the arch sort of members of the Orient, the biggest group, the ones from which the idea of the Orient are fashioned, are surprisingly un-Oriental. It's like there's a fantasy that is bred in the home counties of England and other places of sultans and harems and slave girls and emperors and concubines. It's elaborate two-faced rituals that when you confront everybody else, the ordinary person, they really are quite different. In fact, they're rather hard-working, thrifty, frugal people who, making a way for themselves in the world. And it's surprising how, despite the constant interaction, this idea of the Oriental servility is still there. In fact, friends of mine, Chinese actors working in the UK, always complain. They say, "Oh God, I've been given another part as a boat person, of some servile victim, refugee, or some a reluctant sex worker who's been trafficked and generally abused, and quite if anybody who knows Chinese women and has married one, you will probably know that servile and weak these aren't names that come to mind in describing the rather tough, matter-of-fact attitude that you'll probably discover. Just head to Hong Kong, you'll find it out very quickly. Head to China, even in that sort of highly organised and oppressive government that it has there, you will discover that nobody takes any notice of it. They smoke where there's no smoking signs are. They park wherever they damn well please, just to annoy the government. There is a stick it to the man attitude, and business is done behind closed doors, and we get ways around it, and the emperor is far away, and so on and so forth. You'll find strong-willed people, despite the fact that they've got a government that is trying desperately to keep them all down on the farm, doing as they're told. Which is probably one of the reasons why they're opening up for this sort of colonial enterprise, that the One Belt, One Road. It kind of allows them to go forth, just like the British allowed their adventurers and troublemakers to go forth into the world, so that they didn't upset the natural order of things back in old Blighty. Anyway, that's just me. That's what I reckon. It does work both ways, of course. These prejudices. If you are acting in a Chinese movie, you will discover that they want you to play the part of the idiot the idiot brutish thug who thinks he can take on the little Chinese guy, who of course beats the shit out of you. His kung fu is great. His spiritual strength is greater than yours. Or you're the a mafioso type, a rather evil villain who's undermining the rectitude of the great Chinese nation, or great Chinese people, which is more like it. The Westerner plays the villains basically, and you'll find very few Western women involved in this, because they don't quite fit in with the pattern, despite the fact that in truth there were many Western women married Chinese guys or shacked up with them right from the very beginning, right back in the 18th century. If I find this going on, but that's a digression, as usual. I go on. So what else? Right. 1879, 612 Europeans, Captain Light, and just to carry on with the mosquito theme a little bit, Duke of Wellington, when he was Arthur Wellesley, and his brother was the governor of Bengal, he was sent to Penang to review its defences against the French, because Napoleonic Wars, remember, and the French were all around here, buzzing around, and he looked at Georgetown, and he looked at the fortress there, and he said, God, this is terrible. There's no way we can defend this. You just have to put one frigate into the passage, into the straits just here, and they can sit there bombarding the port, and we can't get our ships in there because they can turn and bombard us, because it's you just can't manoeuvre in there. It's just useless. You have to move the entire colony to the other side of the island, and then we can defend it. We can bring the British Navy in. That was always this thing: supplies. Always be able to bring in your reinforcements and your supplies. Never get cut off, because you get cut off, you get cut off. That's it. They of course said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, Mr. Wellesley, Captain Wellesley. We don't care who your brother is. You're not going to let us. We're not going to move the whole thing. What we'll do though is we will boost up our fortress here, Cornwallis, and they put in a moat. Now then, the moat became a breeding ground for mosquito, which probably wiped out far more British than any French frigate parked offshore bombarding the place would have done. They dropped like flies. In fact, they killed off a number of governors. Now, of course, they've drained it, thank goodness. But that was beside the point, I guess. And we're back to Isabella. She came there to join Bloomfield at a conference. Now, the conference was there because the governor of the day, whose name is Sir W. Robinson. Now, I don't know much about him. He doesn't sound a terribly interesting man. But he was heading home on leave. And of course, as soon as the governor's going on home on leave, everybody wants to talk to him. So he was having a big conference, because everybody wants to talk to him because they want to put in him to take all their papers and claims back to the government, asking for more money, asking for promotions, asking for to move to different areas, asking for, as Isabella put it, for many things that are at the expense of somebody else. In other words, it was a good place to stick the knife into one of your rivals and write reports and complaints and all that. So old William Robinson was only too willing to meet up with Isabella for breakfast because she was the only person that didn't really want anything of him. And he affably introduced her to Sir Hugh Low, or the man who would become Sir Hugh Low. And Hugh Low was the next governor of, British resident of Perak. Now then, if you remember, James Birch had been stabbed and was replaced by J.T. Davidson, and he was brought in there to help clear things up because he personally knew a lot of the people involved in the whole affair, and he'd been ill. He had a buzz of the malaria, of the mosquitoes coming in there. He'd been ill, and he wasn't in a good frame of mind, and he just looked at the situation and he thought, God, I'm going to get stabbed here because they're not giving me the resources I require. I need an armed force here. I need a fortress to live behind it, because this place has been violent, extremely violent for quite a long time, and I can't really see that it's going to, improve that much. And needless to say, he resigned, and they brought in Hugh Low. Now, why would a man like Hugh Low come into what everyone was thinking was a bit of a poisoned chalice? The answer is he'd been stuck in Labuan and as a lowly magistrate for most of his career. He just got stuck there. His wife had died of malaria. Oh, of course, a ghost is said to roam about the gardens, botanical gardens at Labuan to this day. And his daughter actually married his boss, so to speak, or the man that became the governor of Labuan, which isn't necessarily a very high honour, because Labuan was a real backwater. It was supposedly a coaling station for the passing British steamers, and that was about it. So probably not very good at that. It was sort of real backwater, and old Hugh Low had spent his time travelling around the region, going up Kota Kinabalu and other such things, and writing books about the place where so low sales and a moribund career, and a daughter and a boss who really found it terrible that he'd taken up with a Malay mistress and was giving jobs out to her relatives, and they thought, oh no, this man cannot be allowed to prosper here. They said, your own daughter, so it must have been pretty much a bad situation for him to be there, and so he leapt up the chance to leave Labuan and come to Perak, no matter how many people were out to spear every single British resident. Or he was probably just immune to mosquitoes. That was also a thing. He hadn't had anything. He was a robust character. There's a picture of him on the website. Go and have a look at it. I don't know how he survived dressed the way he did, but that's the way he did. It was the British sort of dress code. He had to dress like an Englishman to be a proper Englishman, but I suspect back at home, where his Malay mistress looked after the housing, he slopped around in a couple of flip-flops and a sarong, But for show, he dressed like an Englishman. Had all the whiskers and so on, but so did the local imams. They perhaps shaved them differently, but everybody was a hairy monster at that time. Anyway, so he was a man that Isabella thought was the right sort, because he spoke Malay, of course, and he knew Malay culture inside out. At least she thought he did, and he seemed to get on well. So he becomes the model a British resident for her. However, Emily Innes, the writer of the other book, she accused Low of living beyond his means, which is sort of a hint that his relationships with people like, I'll have to read the names here because I'm going blind, Chung Keng Kui. Chung Keng Kui was the loggerhead of the Hei San. So they had big dealings with people up north as well, up with Yapa Loy and so on. So the Hei San here, run by this guy, and he was very pally with Low, and if anybody has been pally with the head of the local triad, you know that generally means that you will get good deals, Anyway, she more or less was accusing him of corruption there, and worse than that, collusion with the slave trade. Now then, Low is credited with ending the slave trade in Perak, but he did it slowly. He did it in discussion with the Rajas and persuasion. But unfortunately, he didn't do it that quick because Emily Innes's husband resigned because he'd been forced to return a runaway slave to her owner, and it's probably this accommodation with local culture that enabled Hugh Low to actually survive so long. And in effect, he was a bit of a caretaker operation. It wasn't until Sweden came in after him and shook things up and really got things moving and put the infrastructure in and really got the whole economy on its feet. But he was a man that was there to keep things peaceful. And he did it by perhaps a little bit too much accommodation with the local Rajas. But on the other hand, you may well say, he was just in tune with the local culture and it was not taking a superior tone with regard to the others. Or he'd gone native. You can shape it whichever way you want. Isabella thought that he was jolly good sort, and we shall take another look at that when she actually goes off and visits Kuala Kangsar and Taiping. Actually, she goes to Taiping first. That will bring us into a little bit more history about some of the goings on there. So that's today's outburst. So like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. I've done that joke so many times. I can't do it again. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.